Rio de Janeiro, 1970s. A city of postcards and poverty. Tourists saw beaches and carnival lights, but just behind the glitter stood another world, the favelas. Concrete stacked on concrete, houses built on the bones of the hills. Narrow alleys, open sewers, stray dogs, gunfire at night. A place where the state never entered, where survival was not a dream, but an order. It was here that Wagner da Silva was born. His mother worked endless shifts cleaning homes she could never afford. His father vanished between jobs and alcohol. Childhood was a rumor. By 10, he was already a man, carrying groceries for coins, running errands for local hustlers, watching older boys with pistols tucked into their waistbands. He learned early that law came from the barrel of a gun, not from the Constitution hanging in Brasilia. Kids in the favelas had choices, but all of them were traps. School was underfunded, the classrooms falling apart, teachers burned out, most never finished. Work meant shining shoes or hauling bricks for pennies. But the stuff economy, the forbidden market, paid fast, paid big, and paid in power. Powder, dope, crystal, pot, they all moved through the alleys like blood through veins. And every boy saw it. The men who had nothing yesterday, today driving cars, carrying gold, commanding respect. Wagner studied them, not with books, but with eyes sharpened by hunger. He saw who lived, who died, who disappeared. He memorized patterns. Never stand in the open. Never trust a friend with dry hands. Never let fear show in your face. These lessons weren't written, but they were gospel in the hills. By his teens, Wagner was no longer just another boy. He was ambitious. He ran faster, carried heavier loads, delivered stuff deeper into the city. Older bosses noticed the quiet kid who didn't ask questions, who obeyed but never bowed too low. He was loyal, but his loyalty had teeth. At night, the favela sang its own lullabies, gunfire echoing across corrugated rooftops, sirens chasing shadows down unpaved streets. Wagner didn't flinch. Violence became normal, like rain in the tropics. Neighbors whispered that he was different. He didn't just want money, he wanted escape. Not from poverty. Poverty was the air he breathed. He wanted escape from invisibility. In the favelas, to be invisible meant to be nothing, a shadow among millions. Forgotten by the state, ignored by the city. Wagner refused that fate. Every coin he pocketed, every job he completed, every risk he took pushed him closer to visibility. Power was not yet his, but he was reaching. The favelas shaped him in silence. They stripped him of fear, filled him with hunger, and carved into him a truth he would never forget. In a world abandoned by government and mercy, only two paths existed, victim or monster. And Wagner da Silva made his choice. He would not be the victim. He would become the nightmare they feared. The Comando Vermelho, Red Command, was not born on the streets. It was born behind iron bars, inside Brazil's overcrowded prisons in the 1970s. A place where thieves, killers, and political militants shared cells, where survival meant alliance, where betrayal meant execution. From this crucible came a simple creed: loyalty or death. And once the code was written, it never left the walls. By the time Wagner da Silva entered the system, the Red Command already pulsed like a hidden heartbeat. Inmates shared food, weapons, and secrets. Cigarettes became currency. Knives became signatures. A man's word meant more than his life. For Wagner, this was not punishment. It was initiation. He studied the hierarchy, the generals in the top-tier cells, the soldiers who carried blades in the courtyards, the messengers who moved orders out to the streets. Inside, he learned 3 laws. First, discipline. Never question orders. Second, fear. Rule it, spread it, weaponize it. Third, silence. Police, lawyers, guards, none could be trusted. Talk too much and your tongue would be cut out. Wagner embraced all 3. He kept his head down, his ears open, and his knife sharp. The Red Command was more than a gang. It was a government without elections. It taxed every deal in the favela, decided who lived where, who sold what, who died when. From prison, leaders dictated orders that rippled through Rio de Janeiro like shockwaves. Murders were scheduled, debts collected, alliances forged. Each command left the cell blocks through family visits, smuggled phones, or coded letters. Wagner aligned himself early. He wasn't loud, but he was efficient. He proved himself by enforcing rules when others hesitated. A thief who stole from the command was found beaten and left as a warning. A rival who whispered to guards vanished after lights out. Wagner's loyalty was not just spoken, it was written in blood. When he left prison, he didn't return to the streets as just another hustler. He carried the Red Command's brand. In the favelas, that meant protection, power, and fear. Every alley recognized the authority behind those two letters, CV. They weren't graffiti, they were law. The Red Command spread like fire across Rio, each favela a front line. It wasn't random violence, it was strategy. Communities abandoned by the government now followed the command's rules. Wagner enforced curfews, collected taxes from street dealers, and decided who the police could enter and who they could not. He was no longer surviving, he was governing. For the residents, this shadow state was both a curse and a shield. The command punished thieves, paid for funerals, and bought food during shortages. Children grew up seeing Wagner's men as authority figures in uniforms of flip-flops and rifles. Parents whispered to their sons, "Respect the command, or you won't live long." What began as a prison brotherhood had become a parallel nation inside Brazil. Politicians in suits gave speeches downtown, but in the hills, Wagner and his brothers gave the real orders. And unlike politicians, theirs were obeyed instantly. The Comando Vermelho was not just a gang anymore. It was an empire of silence, an empire of fear, and Wagner da Silva was one of its chosen soldiers, shaped by cells, baptized in blood, and rising in power. Wagner da Silva did not inherit power. He built it, one corpse at a time, in the alleys of Rio where walls were painted with both graffiti and blood. By the late 1980s, his name echoed in the favelas like a warning. Police units rarely entered without armored trucks and helicopters, and even then, many didn't return. The hills belonged to Wagner, and the city knew it. Powder, dope, crystal, and pot moved through his hands in endless rivers. Each shipment meant profit, each profit meant weapons. Assault rifles smuggled from Paraguay, pistols brought by corrupt cops, grenades traded on the black market. With weapons came soldiers, and with soldiers came loyalty. Wagner learned early that money could buy allegiance, but fear kept it permanent. Loyalty without terror was fragile. Loyalty enforced with blood was unbreakable. His system was simple, brutal, efficient. A boy who proved himself was rewarded with a gun. A man who hesitated in violence was erased. Enemies weren't given warnings, they were given funerals. Those who tried to betray him disappeared, sometimes overnight, sometimes in pieces across the neighborhood. Families of rivals were targeted, entire bloodlines cut short as examples. Wagner's message was clear. Opposition was not only suicide, it was extinction. But in the favelas, violence was not chaos, it was order. Wagner ruled like a warlord, but thought like a businessman. He set prices, negotiated shipments, controlled supply chains from the ports to the alleys. Each corner store, each lookout post, each safe house was mapped in his head. He didn't just react to threats, he calculated them. Rivals struck blindly. Wagner struck surgically. The community felt his presence in every breath. Residents lived under his laws, laws written not in books, but in fear. Curfews were enforced by gunmen. Disputes were settled not by courts, but by execution. Theft within the favela was punished by mutilation, not arrest. Police patrols were ambushed with military precision, burning cars left behind as symbols of defiance. And yet, his reign carried contradictions. Wagner could unleash slaughter at dawn and pay for a wedding at dusk. He provided food during shortages, handed cash to widows, and sponsored soccer teams for children. For the state, he was a criminal mastermind. For the poor, he was protection when no one else came. Fear and gratitude, violence and mercy, these were the twin pillars of his rule. International traffickers recognized his discipline. Deals with Colombian suppliers expanded his network. Boats carried powder across the Atlantic. Airplanes dropped shipments in remote fields. Trucks hauled crystal through highways guarded by bribes. Wagner's reach extended beyond Rio. His name became currency among cartels across Latin America. But at the core, his empire remained written in blood. The favelas were his fortress, his army both invisible and everywhere. Lookouts with radios, teenagers with rifles, men with rocket launchers. It was a chain of command fueled by desperation and ambition. And Wagner stood at the top, untouchable, unchallenged. For him, violence was not noise. It was a language. Every execution, every mutilated body, every vanished family spoke a message louder than speeches. Wagner da Silva was in control. Violence was not chaos. It was business. It was power. It was survival. In the narrow alleys of Rio's favelas, Wagner da Silva's reputation carried two faces. To outsiders, he was a ghost in the shadows, a warlord whose orders left bodies in the gutters. But inside the hills, he was something else. A provider, a protector, a man who filled the void where the government had abandoned its own people. Fear kept the community silent. Gratitude kept them loyal. When a family couldn't afford a funeral, Wagner paid the bill. Coffins, flowers, food for mourners, covered in full. In neighborhoods where death came often, such gestures weren't charity. They were survival. Mothers wept at his doorstep, not at police stations. Wagner gave what the state never did: dignity in death. When storms flooded the hillsides, when fires devoured shacks built of tin and wood, Wagner's men arrived first. Trucks filled with food, water, clothing. To outsiders, this looked like propaganda. But for families standing barefoot in the mud, it was lifeline. They didn't question where the money came from. They didn't care that it was stained with powder, dope, crystal, and pot. To them, Wagner was mercy when the government sent only silence. He understood the psychology of power. Terror built his image, but compassion built his myth. He sponsored soccer teams, buying uniforms and balls for children who might otherwise pick up rifles. He repaired broken stairways, repaved alleys, even arranged medical care for the sick. Parents whispered Wagner's name with respect. Children wore jerseys with pride. Old men nodded when his men passed. In the heart of the favela, he was not just a criminal. He was the closest thing to a leader they had ever known. The contradiction made him untouchable. Police raids tried to root him out, but each time soldiers climbed the hills, residents stood as human shields. They refused to speak, refused to guide, refused to betray. To the community, Wagner wasn't the problem. He was the solution to a world without order. They saw the state as corrupt, brutal, absent. Wagner's rule, though bloody, was visible and immediate. Politicians labeled him a murderer. Judges called him a parasite. Newspapers wrote his name in blood. But in the favelas, his legend only grew. Songs praised him. Stories softened his crimes. He became a symbol of defiance, a man who gave when no one else would. Even those who feared him admitted one truth: Wagner da Silva ruled with both gun and hand, both cruelty and kindness. This duality was his greatest weapon. Violence silenced enemies. Generosity silenced critics. Each funeral paid, each sack of rice delivered, each soccer field built was not just kindness, it was strategy. Gratitude sealed his walls tighter than bullets ever could. And with every favor, Wagner secured not just obedience, but devotion. In the hills, he was no longer just Wagner the trafficker, Wagner the killer. He was Wagner the provider, Wagner the Robin Hood. And that identity made him far more dangerous than any rifle in his arsenal. Because fear fades with time. Gratitude lasts for generations. Fear built his walls. Gratitude sealed them. Brazil's streets had learned to fear Wagner da Silva, but even legends stumble. By the early 1990s, the state decided to strike. Police, federal agents, and the army launched coordinated assaults on Rio's favelas, declaring war after war, operation after operation. Smoke hung in the air like a permanent curtain, acrid and choking. Bullets tore through walls, leaving holes that were more than concrete. They were warnings. Fires devoured shacks made of tin, wood, and desperation. Families ran barefoot into alleys, carrying what little they could. Wagner watched it all from hidden vantage points, calculating, moving, surviving. For years, he had been untouchable. But even the untouchable can be betrayed. Allies turned informants, lured by promises of money or freedom. Corruption seeped into his own network. Soldiers who once carried his orders now handed him over to men in uniforms. The media called him the favelas ghost, while newswires screamed Red Command Kingpin captured. Headlines splashed his face across newspapers, magazines, even international channels. Every arrest was a spectacle, a reminder that no empire, however bloody or clever, was immortal. Yet Wagner's legend was built on more than one man. He was a commander, not a god. The Red Command had grown into an institution bigger than himself. Orders were carried out even when he was locked in a cell. Territories remained under their control. Drugs, powder, dope, crystal, pot, continued to flow, hidden in plain sight, guided by loyal lieutenants who learned from Wagner's ruthless efficiency. He was part of the system, but not the system itself. Replaceable, recyclable. A cog in a machine too vast for the state to dismantle. Each capture, each raid, each humiliation served only to sharpen the myth. When Wagner was detained, residents whispered not of defeat, but of resilience. He will return, they said, not because he was infallible, but because the Red Command had roots too deep, veins too wide, and shadows too long to ever disappear entirely. The system had outgrown him, and in some ways, he had outgrown the system. Prison was supposed to break him. Solitary confinement, armed escorts, shackles, none of it mattered. Wagner learned quickly that survival meant patience, observation, and endurance. From behind bars, he continued to influence operations, sending messages through coded letters, bribed guards, and loyal messengers. His name alone kept rivals in check, maintained order, and reminded everyone that while he might be caged, his authority remained untamed. The fall was never total. It was a transition, a recalibration of power. Wagner da Silva could be captured, could be humiliated, could be stripped of freedom, but the empire he helped build endured. Favelas still obeyed, streets still feared, shipments still moved. The myth of Wagner da Silva became larger than the man, proof that empires constructed on blood, loyalty, and strategy can survive even when their architects falter. In the end, Wagner wasn't gone. He was part of a system that outlived him. The favelas were scarred, but the Red Command remained. His arrests were temporary setbacks, lessons in resilience for those who followed. Power, after all, is bigger than any one man. And Wagner had ensured that the machine would never stop running. Today, Wagner da Silva exists only in the pages of prison files, court documents, and police reports. His photograph, grainy and unflattering, sits behind glass in the offices of investigators who once chased him through Rio's labyrinthine favelas. To the state, he is another captured criminal, a name filed, a case closed, a lesson in hubris. Yet in the hills where he once ruled, his presence lingers like smoke from a fire that refuses to die. Children speak his name in whispers. Teenagers follow the rules he left behind, and older men nod at empty streets as if expecting him to appear from the shadows. Wagner is gone, but the Red Command endures. The Red Command is no longer just a gang. It is a network, an institution, a shadow state embedded in the veins of Brazil's underworld. The shipments of powder, dope, crystal, and pot continue. Territories once fiercely guarded remain under the watchful eyes of his lieutenants and successors. New leaders rise, younger soldiers who learned the code from the ghosts of Wagner's era. They enforce rules with the same efficiency, the same brutality, and the same strategic vision. What began as a brotherhood inside prison walls has grown into a sprawling empire that spans favelas, cities, and even crosses borders. Wagner's legacy is written in blood, but also in survival. For every enemy he crushed, every rival he eliminated, the system absorbed the violence and expanded. Murders and disappearances did not end the Red Command. They reinforced it. The streets learned that defiance meant death, but obedience, sometimes grudging, sometimes willing, meant protection. In the favelas, men die, soldiers fall, kings are dethroned. Yet the command remains. It adapts, persists, and evolves. Wagner understood this better than anyone. His genius was not just in execution, but in creation. Building an organization capable of outliving him, capable of transforming fear into structure, chaos into order. Even imprisoned, Wagner shaped the narrative. letters smuggled through contacts, bribes passed along hidden channels, strategic decisions made through coded messages. He ensured the command did not falter. His shadow extended beyond walls and barbed wire, a reminder that power is more enduring when institutionalized. In every corner of Rio, from the crumbling stairways of the favelas to the high-rise apartments of the city's elite, the influence of his strategy pulses. Laws may govern above, but the command rules below. History will remember Wagner da Silva not as a man who conquered through force alone, but as a symbol, a soldier who became a legend. His story illustrates a stark truth about the favelas and the systems that arise when the state abandons its people. Structures of power persist even when their architects vanish. Violence is only temporary. Strategy, discipline, and loyalty are permanent. Wagner da Silva built more than an empire. He built a blueprint, a living system that others continue to follow. In the end, the man is gone. The myth remains, and the command marches on, relentless, unstoppable, and bloodied by the passage of time. Wagner da Silva's name will live in whispers, warnings, and in the calculated, unyielding rules of the Red Command he helped create. The favelas remember him, not as a man, but as a shadow, a force, a ghost in the architecture of fear and power. He wasn't the king. He was the soldier who became a symbol. In Brazil's endless war, Wagner da Silva was both executioner and myth.